Opening slide, graphic text, enhancing learning and skill development. Title, Session 4, Creating Teachable Steps, with Milton Tyree, Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthatmatter.net.
So content steps are the step-by-step procedures of the method. They're a way for the person teaching the task to stop the method, to give the learner information on correctness. Now, giving the learner information, we're going to talk about next week. So here we're just looking at the steps. This is the rule. Begin with teachable steps for a typical learner. That's how we always want to start by breaking down any task. We don't want to assume that somebody who has a disability would need more steps than anybody would need. Teachable steps for a typical learner. You'll get some practice for this in just a minute. And then if it turns out that this step that you wrote, that if it does require, as Mark was saying, re-grasping or repositioning the hands or thinking about how you pick up a component or something, you can always add that step to help with your understanding of what it is that the motion the person needs to make. But it could be very well that the content steps, just teachable steps for a typical learner, will work fine for anybody. So you can add steps if needed, start with teachable steps for a typical learner. And here's the other thing, our other understanding of content. I studied content when I was in the university, and we used to study how to break things down exhaustively. So I would have loved this idea of teachable steps for a typical learner. And this last part is also really important and different than what I learned at the university. And that is the steps are developed for the instructor, not for the learner. All of it is about how we're stopping the method in our head to see if the person learning the task knows that part of the task. And so if they're making an error in one part of the step, then we go, well, they have these parts of the task, but they don't have that part of the task, you see. And so the task analysis isn't to hand another person. It really is for the person doing the teaching and their intimate understanding of the task. So to write content steps, you just describe the action you see in your head. You start with an action verb that succinctly describes the action, and you use terminology that's relevant for the setting. Now, here's where it's useful. So why do we care about content? It documents what somebody knows and what they don't know about a task, because all too often perfectly good tasks have just kind of been thrown out of the window because it's been said, well, look, they can't do it. Well, what part of it? Where is the problem? You see, how do we pinpoint where the problem is? That's where content is helpful. Well, it's step 11. And then maybe to really get step 11, you need to teach, well, the thumb always goes on top. Be sure you do this. So you add that step. So you, the person providing the instruction, or the other person providing instruction, is thinking about, oh, that's the problem part. It's like grasping that part of the shirt, with the thumb in the right position. So it's the second point. It identifies and isolates where the problem is, rather than a perfectly good task by saying it's too hard. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, it's a method and content consideration. And this is really important to think about around conditions of work for people even, but it's discrimination within content steps versus judgment points. So these are two different examples of kinds of steps. And some steps have judgment required, and other steps are discrete. They're like binary. They're one way or the other. So you can think of just a light switch is turned on or off. That's discrete. The mail is in the mailbox or it's been taken out. That's discrete. It's one way or the other. Judgment stamps have a range of correctness, like, this bolt needs to overlap the initial threads by 1/2 to 5/8 inches. Well, that's a judgment. Or it's a personal judgment, like, is it clean enough? So my wife may say to me, well, I thought part of the deal was you cook dinner and you clean up the kitchen. I saw you cook dinner, but you didn't clean up the kitchen. Yes, I did. Well, so we have a different judgment, you see, about what is clean and what is clean enough. So it's important to keep these distinctions and steps in mind when teaching a task. And some people really struggle with judgment kinds of steps. I'm going to give you an example here. This is a young man I mentioned earlier who just changed the culture of the Board of Education because of his terrific personality. His name was Chris, and sadly he passed away last year. And I got to assist Chris with his job. So here's what I want to tell you about his job related to discrete and judgment steps. I was, first of all, I had known Chris since he was a little kid. His mom had been my administrative assistant at Community Employment. And so when he got out of high school, the Board of Education wanted to hire him because they just really liked him. And they wanted to hire him to be a custodial assistant. And so I spent some time with Chris. And one of the things I remember Chris told me was, I just don't want work where I get my hands dirty. I thought, okay, well, that's going to be interesting. And something else, he was in a work transition kind of a job, and he was working at a big retail, Walmart, and he was doing custodial work there. And so it was just kind of not starting with the job, with the person started with the job. But I remember going in there once and watching him, say, can I take a look at what you're doing there? And he was in the men's restroom and he was cleaning a sink. And I remember I said, can I, just show me what you do, Chris? And I just like to watch and learn more about how you do things. And he would just rocking back and forth, cleaning that sink, and then he'd move over to the other side and just kind of rock back and forth. And no particular, that I could see, discernment around cleaning the sink. And so I had that in my head. And I remember talking to one of the custodians, and they said, well, it's fine if they're going to hire Chris to help us out. But I tell you, he helped us out one summer, and I give him a mop, and he just stay in the same place all the time. And so I got to thinking about this discrete steps and judgment steps thing. And so I knew the superintendent since I used to work for the school district. And I met with him and I said, I think it's terrific y'all want to hire Chris, but daggone it, we need to think about the tasks that he's going to be doing. And I think some of the tasks that you all have told me about, like mopping and cleaning the bathrooms and stuff like that, I think that's going to be really hard for Chris because they require a lot of judgment. I said it'd be better if he could have tasks to help the custodians where tasks are done or not done. And he said, like what? And I said, well, I'd have to look around, but I've talked to the custodians some, and they tell me that they fill all the soft drink machines with cans, so they get cold and people can buy cold soft drinks. And I said, he could fill the soft drink machines. It's full or it needs some more. It's discrete, you see. I said he could go in the restrooms and look at all the soap dispensers. They're full or they need some soap. Fill them up. You see, he could look at the paper towel dispensers, open them up. Are they full or do they need some more? And I said, the custodians told me they empty all the trash cans in all the offices at the end and classrooms at the end of the day. It was offices, I'm sorry, it's Board of Education. And I said, they're empty or they've got stuff in them. All of those are tasks, you see, that are done or not done. And I think Chris will really excel at those. And I looked at some other things. One of the things that I thought was going to be really important for Chris, you see this picture of him with the mail. I asked, this wasn't a custodial task, but one of the things that I thought people could overlook with Chris was he had some daggone good academic skills. And I said, people are going to think, if Chris's job requires reading, that will kind of raise the bar for him there. So I said, I just paid attention to some stuff they were doing, and like putting the mail up for everybody. I said, could Chris do that? Well, yeah, the receptionist said that'd be terrific if Chris could do that. And then they even changed it to Chris developing something that never happened before, which really helped the school board a lot in terms of people. Their people skills was Chris delivering mail to people's offices. So those were extra kinds of things. One other thing that he did was he learned how to meter mail, because the custodians did that. Go figure. I don't know why, but they took all of the mail that needed to go out that day, and they would run it through the machine to affix the right amount of postage to it. That required reading. It required setting up a machine and stuff like that. Discrete task. You got a big stack of stuff to weigh and get postage on it. It's done or it's not done. You see? So it's one of the considerations to have.
Closing slide graphic text, with thanks to Milton Tyree. Produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change, and our material is for reference only. This video was produced on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. This video was made possible with the support of an information and capacity building grant through the Department of Social Services. Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthatmatter.net.